Welcome in the presentation of biochemistry. We're going to talk about active and passive transport. Transportation. It is a movement or distribution of different materials or goods from one place to another. What does I mean, or even how? All living organisms, plants, humans, and animals have a network of transportation to let all the nutrients, minerals, goods and foods, water and oxygen, hormones, carbon dioxide and waste products reach all the body cells, or even let it go out of the body. Let it reach the target place or the target cell. Transportation or transport has two types, active transport and passive transport. We're not going to talk about them in details on this slide, but all we're going to say is that both of these types are used to transport biochemical nutrients, such as water and oxygen. First type we're going to discuss is passive diffusion. It is the primary movement of ions within the cells along concentration gradient, from high to low concentration gradient. It does not consume energy. Passive transport has four types: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, filtration, and osmosis. Simple diffusion, it is the movement of molecules from high to low concentration, along concentration gradient. This movement randomly happens. That's why it exists in liquid and gas state, due to their free molecules movement, and that's very known. Simple diffusion processes do not stop until reaching equilibrium state or neutralization. Facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is the passive transportation of ions or molecules across the cell membrane through a specific transmembrane integral proteins. And here is the difference between facilitated diffusion and simple diffusion. Let's see some examples about facilitated diffusion. Examples we have is glucose transporter, ion channels, and aquaporins. Actually, the molecules that diffuses using facilitated diffusion process are insoluble molecules or very large molecules. Third type we're gonna talk about is filtration. Filtration is a process of separating solids from liquids and gas. How does body do filtration? Okay, we're gonna have some examples to answer about this question. The selective absorption of nutrients in the body by small intestine. Not all nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. Specific kinds of food, specific kinds of nutrients are absorbed by small intestine, and that's filtration. And the second example we have is kidney. Kidney is a biological filter, and it is a major organ that undergoes filtration in our body. It filters blood by the glomerulus, and any necessary molecules are reabsorbed again to the body. It filters the blood or the body from any toxins that may harm our body, or any residuals of drugs in our body. Osmosis. Some scientists say that osmosis is the movement of water molecules from high concentration gradient to low concentration gradient along concentration gradient. And other scientists say that osmosis is the movement of water and other molecules passing through a selectively permeable membrane till we reach balance or equilibrium along concentration gradient. And finally, at the final of the passive transport types, we're gonna have some examples on that. Ethanol that enters our body and hits the bloodstream. This happens because of the ethanol molecules undergo simple diffusion and passes through the cell membrane without any external energy. Reabsorption of nutrients by the intestines by separating them from the solid waste and transporting the nutrients through the intestinal membrane into the bloodstream. And the last example we have is a raisin. When we got a raisin and soak it in water, the water moves inside the raisin by the process of osmosis. and so it swells. Now we're going to talk about the second type of transport, which is active transport. First, we will know what's active transport. Active transport, guessing it from its name, it's active, something needs energy. So this process needs energy to be done. Active transport is the movement or the process of transporting molecules from a low concentration gradient to a high concentration gradient against concentration gradient. There are two types of active transport: primary active transport and secondary active transport. Let's talk about primary active transport. This kind of active transport needs chemical energy. How can our body afford chemical energy? Well, our body can afford chemical energy by breaking down ATP adenosine triphosphate. By breaking down ATP adenosine triphosphate, we will get ATP needed to transport molecules. To transport these molecules through the membrane against concentration gradient. And that's why all groups of ATP-powered pumps contain one or more binding site. And for transporting the molecules against concentration gradient, that's why we need ATP. ATP molecules found on cytosolic phase of the membrane. Let's see an example. Sodium-potassium pump. Sodium moves outside the cell, while potassium molecules moves inside the cell, and these two movements are done by primary active transport. Secondary active transport. In this type, we use electrochemical energy. This process occurs across a biological membrane, where transporter protein couples the movement of the electrochemical ion against electrochemical gradient. What's electrochemical gradient? Whenever there is a difference in charges, there is electrochemical gradient. Positive and negative charge of the cell are separated, although there is still more negative charges inside the cell than outside the cell. When the cell has high concentration of potassium and low concentration of sodium, then extracellular fluid, sodium ions will move inside the cell depending on concentration, gradient, and voltage. Voltage across membrane facilitate potassium movement inside the cell, but concentration gradient drives it out, and this combination of voltage across membrane and concentration gradient called electrochemical gradient. Plants, as any living organisms, requires also transport system to transport necessary nutrients for all plant parts. The plant consumes stored energy to move the particles against concentration gradient by active transport process, and this takes place also in root cell by absorbing water and minerals. And finally, let's have some examples about active transport. Some of the best examples of active transport, such as phagocytosis of bacteria by macrophages, movement of calcium ions out of cardiac muscle cells, transportation of amino acids across the intestinal lining in the human gut, secretion of proteins like enzymes, peptide hormones, and antibodies from different cells, functioning of white blood cell by protecting our body by attacking diseases, causing microbes and other foreign invaders. At the end of the video, we must thank all our teamwork members: سارة علاء الدين محمد، كريم محمد السيد، أحمد مجدي، أحمد حمدي، عائشة صالح بكري، إسراء عرفة، أسماء سعيد، عبد الرحمن أيمن، أسامة خميس، أحمد عبد الله. This presentation is under the supervision of Dr. Heba Kamel. Thank you for your attention.